and we're saying to ourselves, okay, tore his Achilles. Well, that's minimum 9 months. It could be a year, that type of injury. And he's back for week one in the next season. And he had his best season. He was dominant. I think that was the season Pro Football Focus graded him not only the number one offensive guard in the NFL, the number one offensive lineman, period.
Thursday edition of Birds 365 coming your way. We're excited about the upcoming football on Sunday, even though it doesn't include the Eagles championship week, but we've also got Eagle news to talk about, which is kind of bittersweet. Anytime a guy calls it a career, you're happy for him, but you're also disappointed because you're not going to get to see him play anymore. It's a little easier with the guy we're going to have to talk about today because over the last couple of years, we haven't been able to see him play as much as we would have liked. Mac, Jody McDonald, and John McMullen here to talk Birds football with you for the next 2 hours. You texted me day before yesterday and said ixnay on the Brandon Brooks say, but it looks like we're going to have a meeting to be able to talk to Brandon, which both you and I theorized it was probably going to be a retirement announcement, and that's exactly what happened today. The Eagles confirmed it for you yesterday while we were here on the air on Birds 365, and that's exactly what it was yesterday. No great surprise, and this is another one of those unfortunate incidents where you got to be doing things virtually, and you don't get as good feeling on the emotions of it, but you could judge by what was broadcast yesterday. Brandon Brooks held up well, but I thought he was on the verge of losing it emotionally because anytime you walk away from a game you love, Johnny Mac, it's a difficult thing.
Yeah, it is. Couple times, Jeff Stoutland when he talked about him on one occasion. Then it was Lane Johnson. They both shared similar issues, at least when it came to anxiety and things like that, mental health. So and obviously they're very close. They've been very close for years as the best right side in football, and sort of thrown together, and they just became very, very close. So yeah, it's difficult, and we knew it was coming, sort of behind the scenes, and it was the grind and the constant rehab and the injury after injury after injury after injury. It was torn Achilles, dislocated shoulder, torn Achilles, pec, which I believe was torn, slight tear, but interestingly, it was the pec, because he planned on coming back this season. The team had him in their plans. Nick Sirianni never placed his number on his visor. He would do that for the players out for the season because they thought he was going to come back, and it just didn't respond to the rehab. And Brandon said sometimes you got to listen to your body, and sometimes you got to listen to your body. He's only 32 years old. It's interesting, when we talk about legacy and things like that, we talk about longevity, and that's part of it. I mean, no question about it. But from 2016, really the Doug Peterson era, so 2016 to through that era, he was one of the best offensive linemen in football. I mean, and probably 2019 was the most amazing season. And that's, if you remember, he tore his first Achilles in the playoffs against the Saints, and that arguably cost them the game. They were playing very, very well in that game, and Brandon went down, and all of a sudden, they started to struggle a little bit in the Saints, and that was obviously a really, really tough loss. So you could argue they would have won that game if he was able to stay healthy. And who knows what happens from there as you try to go back to back in Super Bowls. But we're all like all off season. So that's the second round of the playoffs, remember, because that was the double doink year
Right.
in Chicago. So that's later in January, and we're saying to ourselves, okay, tore his Achilles. Well, that's minimum 9 months. It could be a year, that type of injury. and he's back for week 1 in the next season, and he had his best season. He was dominant. I think that was the season Pro Football Focus graded him not only the number 1 offensive guard in the NFL, the number 1 offensive lineman, period. Tackle, guard, center. It was an amazing comeback. But you start to wonder, look, what do you have to do at 340 pounds to come back from that injury? And ultimately, a while later, a year later, essentially, he tore the other Achilles. How much are you favoring one to rehab the other and vice versa? Nobody knows. But it just became over and over and over again. And unfortunately, that span, the longevity wasn't there. But at the height of his game, he was one of the best offensive linemen in football. And he's the definition. I wrote about this on Sports Illustrated. He's the definition of what you want in free agency. It's like, he was a good player in Houston. Coming off his rookie contract, had some upside. You sign him, you bring him in, you get him under the right coach, the right talent around him, and he turns into a star. But it's obviously easier said than done when it comes to evaluating things correctly. But the Eagles certainly got Brandon Brooks correct.
Jam, I want to talk about this year first, and we can talk about the history and his contribution as part of the Super Bowl champion. He'll go down with that group, and it'll be an all-time group as far as adoration from the Philadelphia fans goes as well. It should be. This past year, when he showed up at training camp and played in the very limited snaps he had in the preseason and game number 1, judging as any media guy could from an offensive line standpoint, it's difficult because we don't have the same game day breakdown tapes that the coaches get and the like. It's just something that you need to become good at to be able to evaluate. And I know you're that kind of football observer. How would you say look this year? Because no one is surprised. It's the combination of injury on top of injury on top, 4th time, almost an entire year by the wayside. No one should be surprised that Brandon Brooks decided to call it a career yesterday, even though at age 32 for an offensive lineman, some offensive linemen play well into their 40s. Whitworth is coming back this week and is going to play, and he's been doing it for close to 2 decades. So it's certainly plausible that an offensive lineman can play well into his 30s. Brandon's not going to do that. How did he finish up? What was did we start to see a decline in the game? I know we started to see decline in his health because the injuries just added up to too much for him to begin to come on. But from what you observed, talking to Stoutland, talking to his teammates and the like, what level was Brandon at when, unfortunately, his final snap was taken?
It really is tough to kind of formulate because he didn't play that much. He really played the first game, and obviously the Eagles played very well in Atlanta, and then he got hurt fairly early in the second game. So we had one game to really judge Brandon coming back, because remember, he missed the entire 2020 season.
Right.
So ultimately, over the final 2 years, he played 2 games and really 1.5.
Game and a half, yeah.
Yeah. So he didn't look like himself early, I would say, in Atlanta, and especially, as a run blocker, because that's what he was most known for. He was such a big, powerful guy, and he would just blow people off the line of scrimmage. And I talked a lot about how for the second Achilles, he dropped all the way down to about 270, 275 and came all the way back up and was a little bit less than he typically weighed. So I don't think he was quite looking like himself, but you would think as the year went on, it would have got better and better and better. But we barely saw him. So it is tough to formulate, but clearly he didn't think he was the same. So I think he knows better than anybody else. And, I do keep going back to that because I think it's kind of foreshadowed Brandon's thinking when he dropped all the weight to try to rehab. I think it was a key point in his decision making, and he admitted, he was thinking about retirement in 2020, trying to come back from that. So I think that was the crux of it all. And obviously the pec, you you're when you go from anybody's been in the weight room, when you go from 275 to 330, 335, you're lifting a lot of weight and you're putting a lot of strain, especially in your upper body. If you're an offensive lineman, you want to worry. Obviously, your legs are very important as well. But and then all of a sudden you get those pec strains and those pec tears when you're doing a lot of upper body work. So again, who knows? Sports science can't figure it out. I certainly can't figure it out. But 2 games over 2 years, 2 full seasons, it's just difficult. And I understand Brandon's thinking. Let's put it that way.
And usually, when you lose a player of the magnitude of Brandon Brooks, it's because he was 3-year consecutive Pro Bowl type player. That's a major loss for an organization, and you're going to expect the team to not be able to play as well when you just subtract that kind of a talent and production level guy. The Eagles have done it. They've done it 2 years running. They have been able to fill the hole, the void put in place because of Brandon Brooks' injury, and we bend over backwards to talk about it here on Bird 365 about their offensive line depth and how much Steph Stoutland means to this team, that he gets these guys who aren't Brandon Brooks up to speed so the drop-off isn't as noticeable as it would be or you would think it would be, and kudos and credit to the Eagles for something like that. Now it's just a permanent issue that Brandon Brooks has stepped away, but when you were evaluating the Eagles end of the season, looking forward to next season, what moves are going to have to make to get better and the like, you weren't factoring Brandon Brooks into any of that thought process, were you?
No. I had a pretty good indication that he was not going to be back. So the only question was, is he going to retire? Is he going to try to go play somewhere else? And I don't think he wanted to play anywhere else. That factored into it as well. So, yeah, it's one of those difficult decisions, but it was pretty clear when he didn't come back. Remember, it was supposed to be an 8-week injury. So you get hurt in week 2, you're talking about week 10, week 11. And that's when we all started asking Nick Sirianni for updates, and no updates, no updates, no updates, no updates, no updates. Because Brandon was contemplating behind the scenes if he even wanted to try to continue to play, and it became clear that that was the end of his career, certainly here in Philadelphia, and it ended up to be the end of his career as a whole. And yeah, the Eagles knew that ultimately, when it came to 2022, they were going to have a new full-time right guard, and they've been planning for this, and that's one of the reasons they drafted Landon Dickerson, who's got the ability to play everywhere in the interior. They have Isaac Seumalo, who's got tremendous versatility and can play anywhere, basically on the offensive line, who will be coming back from injury. So you have to – and I always talk about this, Jody. Too many fans, when people do get injured, because I'll bring this up with Isaac. Now, Isaac's much younger. He doesn't have the same history of injury after injury after injury. But, you can't just assume a guy's in stasis for a year and he's going to come back and be the exact same guy. It doesn't happen like that. So you have to worry about that as well. And obviously, Jason Kelce has to make his decision. Ultimately, I think he's going to go back and play. And if he comes back and plays, I think the Eagles are set and they understand they're just going to move Isaac from left guard to right guard because they don't want to touch Landon Dickerson after what he was able to accomplish when Isaac went down. And that's still pretty good. compared
Very
to the
good.
rest of the
And
NFL.
you mentioned on how altogether too often people just, all right, well, he was out, but now he's coming back and he's going to play at the exact same level. More often than not, that is not the case. There is usually a reduction or a drop off. But Brandon Brooks, appropriately enough, on the day where we say goodbye to him, kind of makes you think the other way. Because he came back from an injury and he was an improved player. He was a great player to begin with. He got injured, missed a whole year, and he came back and was even better than that. So, who knows?
For a short period of time. And I do want to, we talk about pro football focus grades a lot. They're not the be all end all, but here was Brandon Brooks in Philadelphia's first 4 years. 12 out of 75 his first year, which was 2016. Third out of 79 in the Super Bowl season. 8th out of 77 in 2018. And then when he came off the Achilles, and I said the 2019 number 1 out of 83 and the number 1 offensive lineman in the entire NFL. It's pretty good.
All right, one other thing I want to touch on. We're going to get our first guest up here, Mike Sealski. We had booked before Brandon's announcement came down. Mike will surely have insight and opinions to share on that when he hops aboard with us. But we've already kind of broken down where you and I see the Eagles going from a production and on the field without Brandon Brooks going forward. There's also the financial end of it. Brandon walks away, but the Eagles still have cap issues to deal with. They'll immediately get cap relief because he was scheduled to have, I think, a 19 million and change cap number in the upcoming year, salary plus prorated bonuses and everything else. When you retire, yes, that prorated money from guaranteed money that was already given, bonuses and the like, you have to account for at some point. The Eagles have chosen to spread it out over 2 seasons. They redid Brandon's contract prior to his retiring yesterday. So he's only going to have a veteran minimum number as a base salary on their books as of right now. But they still have a goodly amount to cover for over the next year. They get a break. They will actually have more flexibility in this year, but they did push a little money forward, which I always kind of wonder about. Is that a smart thing or is it a questionable thing? If you believe the cap is going to go up every single year, which it does sans COVID, and we don't know, maybe there's another outbreak of COVID, but the Eagles are betting on that not being the case. So they are putting more money forward to 2023, which is going to give them less flexibility the year after, but they actually create salary flexibility this year.
Yeah, they do, and they actually went up, and as you mentioned, in salary cap space because of the tweak they did with the contract. And right now, and it is, I hear what you're saying. I mean, I do think fans get too worried about the salary cap we see every year. Did the Eagles get under the salary cap last year? Remember, we talked about salary cap hell with Carson Wentz. They were able to get under just fine. Now, there are different, I mean, New Orleans would be a perfect example. One of the reasons the Saints are, Sean Payton's moved on. You have difficult decisions to make when you go way over the cap, and you have to make, and the Eagles had to do that last year. Howie's great at it. I wouldn't lose a lot of sleep over it. They have enough room. They'll be able to do what they want to do. They can't be one of the splashiest teams, but you don't want to be one of those teams. You don't want to go spend $80 million in free agency on your cap because that means you stink to begin with. So, it's all about making good football decisions, and Howie's good at manipulating things in the cap. But yeah, they have to pay the money down the road, and that's part of kicking the can. But everybody does it. It's not just them. He was one of the first. Everybody does it now. They came up with the voidable years idea, and it's just part of the NFL. It's bookkeeping.
Bookkeeping is something the Eagles had to do, and now playing without Brandon Brooks is something they're going to have to do pretty darn good, replace him this year, and we'll see if they can continue that going forward. Sans one of their key contributors to a Super Bowl winning team here in Philadelphia. All right, coming up next, our buddy Mike Sealski for the Inquirer is going to hop on board. We'll certainly ask him about Brandon Brooks, the Eagles offseason. I'll get some playoff thoughts for the championship game weekend while we're at it with Mike Sealski, who's next here on Birds 365.
Go.